Our country appears more divided now than ever. Many would attribute that to a number of policies that Trudeau Liberals are bringing forth, including Bill C11, which many would agree is about censorship, Bill C69, the bill that former Alberta Premier referred to as the No More Pipelines Act, which has been enforced, and Bill C21 now, which many would argue is an attack on our farmers and ranchers, since it threatens even stiffer gun controls to take away the right to own a number of rifles, including a shotgun. Now, to talk about these bills in more detail, and to talk a bit about the political landscape is Medicine Hat Cardston Warner MP Glen Motz. Glen is joining us from our nation's capital in Ottawa. Glen, welcome to Bridge City News.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here and join you.
Now, Glen, before we chat about some of the bills, let's discuss what we just witnessed in Ottawa during the public inquiry into the Emergencies Act. What are your thoughts on what you heard?
Well, I don't know if you're aware, I also am the vice chair of the Special Joint Committee on the Invocation of the Emergencies Act, made up of parliamentarians, members of parliament, and senators. And so we are going through a similar process with a different focus than what the commission did. It is troubling at the very end that the narrative changed, that the government all of a sudden broadened the scope of their definition of a national security emergency. Unlike what the Act actually says they were required to do. The Act says you have to follow Section 2 of the CSIS Act that lays out what a national security threat to national security really is. It would appear as if they didn't like that definition because it didn't meet their narrative, right? And so they had to turn around and create their own, but they wouldn't release that. The intelligence advisor to a national security advisor, to the prime minister, wouldn't release it, wouldn't talk about it, wouldn't give any details. Justice Minister Lametti didn't give any details. And the prime minister, they all skated the issue. That's not transparency, and that's not what Canadians are expecting from our committee, nor from the Royal Commission or the Commission, the Rillieux Commission.
Now, Glen, with your background in policing, was there any testimony that maybe surprised you a little bit?
Yes, I think we had an expectation that there's more coordination in with policing and police operations between the Ottawa Police Service, the Ontario Provincial Police, and the RCMP. They had a plan in place. Unfortunately, the government didn't use it. But I think the most important telling issue is the government kept asking city officials and police officials to continue to have discussions and conversations with protest organizers, but they themselves would not. And that to me is incredibly telling on this government's divisive tactics. The reality is, people came to Ottawa to protest what they felt were inappropriate mandates from COVID, how it was impacting their life, and they wanted government to hear them. And so, I even tried to facilitate meetings between Tamara Litch, the main organizer that put this together, and a couple of government ministers, specifically Minister Mendocino of Public Safety and Al Gabra of Transportation. And after a couple of days of going back and forth, they refused. They just said, it wasn't going to happen. And so, the organizers were prepared to have a meeting and then, have their people leave. The government wasn't interested. Since when does the government not listen to their people just because they may not like the position of the people who are there? And it was incredibly divisive. We have a prime minister calling people who have a different view than him racists, misogynists. Those people. That is completely inappropriate for anybody. But then again, for the leader of our country, for our prime minister to have that attitude, it should give people pause moving forward.
So, Glen, do you think we may see Justin Trudeau be asked to resign if Justice Rillieux determines that there is no reason for the federal government to invoke the Emergencies Act?
Well, the unfortunate, I think, believe reality of the legislation and the fact that they invoked it wouldn't be that there wouldn't be any. I don't believe there'd be any sanctions against Trudeau himself or the Liberal government. What there will be, though, coming from our committee for sure, and I'm sure from the Relu Commission, is recommendations that, and I'm sure, on many things, but I'm hopeful that one of those recommendations will be that no government moving forward will ever use the Emergencies Act in this circumstance ever again.
Let's move on to the carbon tax here for a moment now. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has blasted the Liberals about tripling the carbon tax. And Glen, let's talk about the timing right now. So many families across the country, including here in Alberta, are hurting with a high cost of living with inflation. You talk to a lot of MPs. What sense are you getting from them as well? Is this just bad timing with increasing the carbon tax?
Well, a carbon tax doesn't work, first of all. I mean, the Liberal government has not met one environmental climate target that they've ever set for themselves. So it's evident that the carbon tax is not a tool to improve the environment. It's a tax. And so, I mean, we oppose it. We oppose it straight across the board. I've never supported the carbon tax, and I never will support the carbon tax because it does not work. But to continue to go down this path of increases on the carbon tax on top of all the other cost of living and inflationary costs going on means the government is tone deaf. They're pushing an ideology that has little to do with common sense, little to do with the environment. That is trying to keep pace with maybe other global leaders or a position globally that they think is going to put them in good stead. It's not working. It's harming Canadians. It's not helping our environment, and it adds insult to injury for those who are already struggling to make ends meet straight across the board, whether it be food, groceries, gasoline, whatever it is. It's costing everybody more. Heating our homes. Farmers. Like it is having a dramatic impact on people's way of life and our ability to manage with the limited resources that we all have.
Now, speaking of farmers, we were chatting with Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas about having the carbon tax being removed from agricultural fuel to be a real benefit to our producers and our farmers. Apparently passed committee. What's the latest with that right now? Making its way now to Parliament Hill to be debated?
Yes, it's. I believe it's gone through. I don't know what stage it's at. I don't recall offhand, but I do know that that's a bill that was put forward by my conservative colleagues. We certainly support it. I don't know what stage, whether it's at third reading or in committee or already sent to the Senate. I'm not sure. I apologize for that, but it is something on. That's incredibly necessary that we remove the tax on grain drying, for example. Because those are some of our producers incur tens of thousands of dollars just in the carbon tax alone. If they're taking their grain off when it's a little tough, and so that's the moisture levels are too high. That's unacceptable. What does that do? Then it limits their ability to make ends meet and reduces their bottom line, their margins. Then at the end of the day, food prices continually go up as a result.
And heating barns, we can't forget about that, especially as the mercury plummets as we get closer to the winter months here. Now, Glen, let's start outside of the carbon tax. What other tax breaks do you think that the Trudeau Liberals should be giving us right now? What are the Conservatives pushing?
Well, I think there's a number of things. One, January 1, a month from now, there's a payroll taxes increasing. All employers are required to increase payroll taxes on CPP and employment insurance. As a result, they've been through a lot of turmoil already as small businesses. They employ the majority of people in this country, and to burden them even more and to burden our employees even more by paying more tax is, again, completely tone deaf to the circumstance where we're at. We should be eliminating the carbon tax altogether. The Liberals proposed a GST rebate, which is certainly welcome. However, it's a small, it's incredibly small compared to what could be done. And I think, our leader and us as Conservatives have been pushing, listen, no new taxes, period. No new taxes at all. And if you're going to have increased spending, if a ministry or one department of government decides to increase their spending, they need to find equivalent savings elsewhere to support it. And I think that's something that we've been pushing. Like, we can't keep borrowing, spending, or creating currency out of bonds that continue to drive up inflation.
Well, even the parliamentary budget officer says he's got a problem with all of the spending the Liberals have been doing. How it's been getting out of hand. $20 billion over, what they discussed earlier. Glen, let's talk about Bill C21 and the amendment to the proposed gun legislation. Legislation that could potentially impact a lot of hunters and farmers because it would basically outlaw shotguns and even .22 caliber rifles.
Well, I want to talk about absolutely, because we're front and center in this now. I sit on the Public Safety Committee as well as the other Emergencies Act Committee, so we're dealing with this as we speak. We had a meeting yesterday afternoon. We'll have another one tomorrow morning. So let's back up. The Liberals proposed C21 back in the fall of 2021 or in the early spring of 2022. And it was about freezing handguns. It was a handgun freeze. That was generally the bill, and to do some stuff with red flag laws and things like that. It was at committee. We're ready to start amendment, clause by clause amendments to the bill last week. And we get, hundreds of page document that says, here's the Liberal amendments to their own bill. And those amendments included new definitions for a military style assault rifle, and they are including that and to be a prohibited weapon, a prohibited firearm, I should say. And included in that is a definition of what they consider to be a prohibited weapon, prohibited firearm, and that's any firearm that's capable of firing center fire cartridge in a semi-automatic manner that has that the gun's original design could accept a cartridge or magazine that can hold more than 5 rounds. Now, in Canada, holding more than 5 rounds is already a prohibited device. So what the Liberal is saying effectively is, if you have any sort of a rifle or shotgun that is capable of having a magazine that, even though it's only in law in Canada to only have 5, you could put one in that's larger than that, then that's automatically prohibited. But what this legislation does is it targets people that aren't the problem in this country. We've been saying this all along. It targets, the Grandpa Joes who are teaching and passing on a legacy of hunting and sport shooting and those sort of things to their families, to generation after generation after generation. And it misses the mark completely. We have no ability with this legislation to limit what criminals do. And that's the problem. If we want to improve public safety, Conservatives will be front and center with those conversations, but we aren't with this bill. And so that's the issue. We have now attacked, like the Liberals have done all along, they've attacked hunters and farmers with the addition of many hunting rifles and shotguns. And there's even a .22 caliber, which is a rimfire firearm, and they call them, weapons of war. Like, give me a break. These guys don't know what they're doing. They seem to have an agenda that no one understands, and they've offered no idea of how they're actually going to play this out. And that's part of the challenge that we have with this, and we're going to keep fighting it. It is a problem, and we're hearing it loud and clear from across the country. People are tired of the gamesmanship with which the Liberals are doing the dance to their anti-gun lobby.
Now, Glen, from your experience in law enforcement, what do you think is the key then to limiting gun violence in our country?
There's multiple things we can do to eliminate gun violence. Number one, we need to make sure that we know that violent crime is up in this country. We know that gang homicides are up in this country. We know that people get involved in criminal activity. We need to spend effort and energy in programs that actually work. A friend of mine, Marcel Wilson, runs a 1x1 movement in Toronto, trying to get kids out of gang life and make sure that they don't get into it. That's a preventative measure. Number two, let's focus attention where the tension is. That is on criminals. So people who use firearms in the commission of offense should be held accountable and should be held more accountable than if no firearm is being used. Then once they are, if they're charged with an offense and they commit another offense, why are we to let them out on bail? The revolving justice door doesn't work. So Bill C5 that the government does and their soft on crime approach doesn't work. Bill C75 that talks about, easier to get out on bail. Then let's focus on illegal firearms. Illegal firearms account for anywhere, depending on the police service, anywhere from 80 to 90% in that range of the firearms used that the police have found in firearm offenses. And they are illegal and they're brought in and they're smuggled in from, generally south of the border. So why aren't we focusing resources on, those sort of task forces that we can eliminate the flow of that? There are porous areas of our border that we need to pay attention to. And, rather than spending $5 or $8 or $10 billion if they compensate for all the firearms they're looking at taking, can you imagine what that actually equates to for keeping people out of gang life, to making sure our justice system is properly resourced, including the law enforcement, focusing where focus needs to be. And that's what Canadians expect from a government, and not making sure that, we have what's been affectionately called the hug-a-thug approach to the justice system.
Glen, we only have about 30 seconds left here, but I wanted to touch on Bill C11 that the Liberals seem very set on bringing to pass. What do you think the federal government is hoping to achieve with this new censorship?
I don't know. I quite honestly, I'm disturbed by it, like Canadians all should be. The committee, I don't sit on that committee, but what I've been told, much debate occurred in committee, and people they didn't find anybody who supported it. At the Senate, there was similar discussions going on, but they seem just absolutely head down, pushing ahead with something. There's got to be more that we're missing, but we can see by this government, they're not a government for the people. They're a government of the people, and they want to be in charge and they want to control their people, and that's just wrong in a democracy.
Glen Motz, Conservative MP for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner. Thanks so much for joining us today from our nation's capital.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.